All right, our next question comes from panelist KOAT Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabando. Shelley.
Governor, you have tried to change the law which allows undocumented immigrants to get New Mexico driver's licenses. If reelected, will you continue to try to get the legislature to ban that? And Mr. King, for you, what is your position on undocumented workers getting driver's licenses here in New Mexico?
You have a minute 15, Governor.
Absolutely. I would continue to work to do the people's work. They have asked me to continue to fight to repeal the law that provides driver's licenses to illegal immigrants because it's not an immigration issue, it is a public safety issue. We have had drug rings in New Mexico and around the country who actually traffic in humans and pay $3,000 to $5,000 to come to New Mexico to commit felonies, to receive documents that are fraudulent, who then present to the motor vehicle department and pretend to be someone that they're not. And then they leave the state to who knows where. We have no idea what their intentions are. And therefore, yes, I will continue to fight for the people of New Mexico because 75% of New Mexicans want this law repealed. And I represent them as their public servant, and therefore, yes, because it is a dangerous law that we have implemented in 2003. And so, yes, I will continue to fight to have that law repealed.
Mr. King, you also have a minute 15.
You know, there is an important public safety issue here, and that's the reason that the law was passed in 2003, and that is that law enforcement in New Mexico said that they are much safer, that the public is much safer if everyone who's driving a car has a driver's license that shows their photo, where they are from, and gives some assurance that they have insurance and that they have been trained to drive. And so there's a public safety issue there. What the governor is talking about, people coming in and illegally getting driver's licenses in that way is already a crime in New Mexico, and we're all fighting that crime in New Mexico. So the issue of people that are lying about where they live or that are coming in and getting driver's licenses for people that live in Chicago or live somewhere else is really not the issue here. The issue is, are we going to say everybody that drives a car in New Mexico has to have identification? And that's what this law is designed to do. Now, last year, 2 years ago, we had discussions in the legislature about whether or not our driver's licenses meet what's called the Real ID Act. And you all remember there was a lot of discussion about whether or not New Mexico citizens were going to be able to get on airplanes if we didn't adopt a driver's license code that complies with the Real ID Act. So I certainly think that we need to work to make sure that we have driver's licenses that comply so that New Mexicans can fly.
I'm sorry, Mr. King, I have to cut you off there. The red light went on. Governor, you have 30-second rebuttal.
You know, as I said before, this is not an immigration issue. It is a public safety issue. And if you're willing to come to New Mexico and to commit felonies and give fraudulent information to the motor vehicle department, you're willing to give the wrong name. And that is why it is unsafe for even police officers to think they can rely on the identification on that driver's license. It is something that needs to be repealed because it made New Mexico unsafe. And that is not something that we want within our borders.
Mr. King, also 30 seconds.
Good. I think people need to consider what the real effect of this will be for the governor. First, every single New Mexican will have to go to the motor vehicle department and prove their citizenship. So that means everyone. But I think that we recognize that it is more likely that citizens that look like they are from other countries are going to be more likely to be stopped by the police under that. And we have an anti-profiling law that we passed in the legislature recently because we don't want our police profiling. And so this is a very much more complex issue than what the governor has said. But there is a public safety reason for doing what we do right now.
Our next debate question comes from the Albuquerque Journal reporter James Monteleone. James.
Governor Martinez in 2010 pledged across the board to not raise taxes. And I'm curious, under what circumstances would you be in favor of a tax increase?
Mr. King, you go first.
Well, and we've had that discussion. In 1987, when I came into the legislature, New Mexico was about 60% dependent on oil and gas revenues for our general fund. And when the price of oil dropped from $100 a barrel down to $12 a barrel, we found ourselves in a real crisis where we were going to have to shut down our schools, we were going to have to really curtail public safety, all of those kinds of things. And so Governor Carruthers, who was a Republican governor, submitted a package to the legislature that said, here's what we have to do so that we can keep the doors open and the lights on, police, fire, all of those kinds of things. And in those days, we did change the tax structure so that we had a little bit higher gross receipts taxes. We had some other taxes that we raised in order to meet that. So it's always foolish, I think, to just say, I promise I won't raise taxes, because we all know that any politician that's ever promised that probably didn't really hold up to that when they did. I think that real leadership means that you will look at occurrences, and I think that people are willing to pay taxes if they know that they're getting good services for the taxes that they pay. One of the problems we have in New Mexico right now is that government is so broken that the taxes that people are paying are not being used in an efficient way. And so I think that the tax issue has to be considered along with how our government works.
All right, Governor Martinez, you also have a minute 15 to respond.
When I took office, I inherited the largest deficit in the history of New Mexico, and I made promises to the people of New Mexico that I would not raise taxes. And I've kept my promise. In 1987, Mr. King, the politician, actually voted for the largest tax increase in the history of New Mexico. But recently, he was asked whether he regretted it. And he said no, he did not regret it, which means he would do it again. So if he finds himself in a pinch because state government has overspent and is overgrown, the families of New Mexico are going to feel the pain, because you will be taxed and so will be the small businesses. It was interesting that he mentioned the oil and gas industry, that they were 57% of the general fund. Currently, they're 38% of the general fund. And he calls them sweatshops, and he says they should be unionized. They are a huge amount of the revenue that we use to protect our state. Our law enforcement officers are paid with that. State employees are paid with the revenues of that money. But when it's convenient, he'll call them the sweatshop. When they're not producing enough, then he raises taxes on you. You decide who's the politician.
Mr. King, half-minute rebuttal.
Sure. When the governor says what I said, you can be pretty sure that she's not telling the truth. So let's start there. Secondarily, when she says that she inherited a large deficit, her understanding of New Mexico government is fairly rudimentary, because our Constitution doesn't allow us to have deficits. It's not like the federal government. And so the legislature and the governor always have to work together to submit a balanced budget. And that has always been true. We had balanced budgets before she was the governor. We will have balanced budgets after she's the governor. So it's just not true to say that.
You also have 30 seconds.
You're absolutely right, Mr. King. We're not allowed to have a deficit. And that's why I balanced the budget. And in year 2, we had a surplus. Year 3, we had a surplus. And year 4, we're going to have a surplus. And that's because of the management that we have had in state government. We have learned to live within our means. We do not grow government for the sake of growing government. And that is what I am most proud of, is that we closed that budget and we made sure that we had a surplus for the people of New Mexico.
Our next debate question comes from Action 7 News anchor Todd Kurtz. Todd.
Santa Fe City Council is moving forward to decriminalize marijuana right now. Now, would you be in favor of this going statewide, or would you push it even further and be for legalizing marijuana?
Governor, you go first, a minute 15.
Most of you know that I was a career prosecutor for 25 years on the border, and have lived most of my life on the border. And I do not favor the decriminalizing of marijuana or the legalization of marijuana. I believe that that is something that only the legislature can do. And of course, doing it with the input of the people of New Mexico, whether or not that should take place. I have seen what can happen when someone is involved with marijuana, especially young teenagers, and how that can take them on to doing other kinds of drugs. We've seen Colorado. I heard a story just the other day. There was a 3rd grader who went to school with a baggie of marijuana. And when it was taken away from him, he said, but I thought it was legal in Colorado, and so I can take this with me. I can have it, I can use it. And that's the misunderstanding. It is against federal law, and I do not believe that decriminalizing marijuana is healthy for New Mexico. We do have a medical marijuana program that is successful, and that will continue to exist in our state.
Mr. King, also a minute 15.
Yes, I don't favor the legalization of marijuana in the way that they've done it in Colorado, but I do favor decriminalization to this extent. One of the largest parts of our budget is our corrections budget. And when we take people that have a small amount of marijuana, a personal use amount of marijuana, and put them in prison, it is not the best use of our funds. And so I believe that we can have a series of laws in New Mexico that look at the level of crime. We should be spending our time and our interest on violent crimes, on crimes where people should be, that should be put away or are put in our prison space. And with regard to marijuana, we should have rational penalties that relate to the amount that people are using. I also think that with regard to medical marijuana, there's a significant difference between myself and the governor, because she has been trying to narrow the medical marijuana program significantly to the point that it would impact veterans who have PTSD. It would impact various people who are getting real relief from using medical marijuana. And so we need to make sure that that program complies with the law that the legislature has done, and that the state supports that program, because there are a lot of people that are being helped there.
All right, Governor, you have 30-second rebuttal.
Certainly, again, as a prosecutor for 25 years and I've prosecuted every kind of case, I guarantee you that there isn't a single inmate that on their first offense and minor possession of marijuana ends up in prison. That is not something that our judges are doing or ordering. In fact, they're given probation and the assistance necessary.
Mr. King, 30 seconds as well.
So, well, I think that the answer is clear there. I think that we know that throughout New Mexico that the law has been enforced in various ways throughout New Mexico. So I think one of the questions was, do we think that we should have a law that is applied the same way throughout New Mexico? And I think that that would be an appropriate use of our legislative policy-making authority.
All right, candidates, thank you. We have now reached the midpoint of our debate. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our Commitment 2014 debate from KVIA Action 7 News and the Albuquerque Journal.